Zettelkasten for a year, roughly a year, and since this February, I'm doing it digitally. So my workflow is all over the place, but this book already had to get it a bit more regulated, correcting and making notes. And that's me.
I heard recording, which means Dan must be hiding
I'm
somewhere.
here. Yeah. Good morning. I'm sorry. I'm late. I lost track of that. I was writing and I lost track of the time. So
I brought some friends, so you know.
yes, thank you. Thanks. And I don't have Bob's email. I left a message on his contact sheet on his website, but yeah. So I guess
Yeah.
we have
Oh,
the
I've been in touch with him in like 10 different forums. So, you know.
okay. Cool.
I
So yeah, if
I
you can.
mentioned earlier he'll try and join us the second week. The
Yeah.
third week he's getting married abroad. So
I did see that in the community forum. So good for him.
I'll say that for the tape for people watching late and joining next week or the week after. But we were going through some quick intros. So if you want to go next, feel free.
Okay, thanks. And thanks for picking up the host duties. I appreciate it, Chris. Hi, I'm Dan Alasso. I teach history and write, which is what I sort of lost my sense of time doing just now. And I've been sort of interested, fascinated by the ideas of kind of note making and how to sort of coordinate all of the different places where I used to keep information into something. And I've tried both the write on cards, sort of Zettelkasten format, as well as couple of different tools I've used. I used Roam when it kind of came out, and then I switched to Obsidian, and then I've tried Scrintl, and I use, as Chris does, I use Hypothesis quite a bit, although not quite to the extent that he does. And although I have hope, but yeah, that's what I'm doing, and I actually have sort of been gradually over the years enhancing a writing handbook that my dad had written when he was at University of California, and adding different elements to it. I added a kind of a note-making element in the last iteration, and in the next one, I'll be adding a sort of an Adlerian kind of how to read element. So that's me. And again, I apologize for lateness. I think this is the first time that's ever happened, which is the wrong time for it to happen, I guess. But there it is.
Next on my list, I have is it F?
Yes, F. Yeah, I'm. We identify as an unpublished writer. I started with Rome as far as any sort of Zettelkasten, so that would be 2020, I think. And I've used several different things. I'm kind of focusing on Obsidian right now, and I'm interested in the whole. I really identify as a philosopher, futurist, and type of writer type of thing. So I really like to get into the philosophy of even like the Zettelkasten. So, but anyways, I introduced myself to Dan a few months ago, and this will be my first book club with you all. Thanks.
And then next up, I have John Mayo.
Yeah, I'm John. Professionally, I do computer programming with a lot of database stuff. I'm a podcaster. I've been using Obsidian for a while, but I'm not going to claim to really have a Zettelkasten, just a bunch of source notes that need to get, further processed into, I guess, a proper Zettelkasten. So.
Yep. And then Florian.
My name is Florian Lignel, and Lignel Florian Badyok for the Hungarians. I'm in New York City. I have been part of the Zettelkasten.de commentariat, I suppose. It's not something I'm proud of, since 2021. And I go by the name of Zettel Distraction there. So now I've outed myself. And elsewhere, I'm Errol Dog, which is an anagram of doggerel. That's on Substack. So that's about all I like to say. I have the Zettelkasten, I've maintained it since 2021. And well, all right, one other thing. I have a sample GitHub, I'm sorry, a sample Zettel template on GitHub. If anyone's interested, I can put that in the chat. And I also have the software configuration I use, along with various templates and other gadgets to keep the Zettelkasten going in my absence. It runs itself.
Cool.
The end.
And next up, Edmund.
Yeah, hello. My name is Edmund. I'm a retired systems engineer and data scientist from Germany. I'm a Zettelkasten.de forum user since some years and started with my Zettelkasten in Obsidian about 3 years ago. And what I enjoy very much is to discover some of the hidden structures and concepts from Zettelkasten. And there are so many variations and so many unknown ideas behind this umbrella concept. It's really exciting to learn more about it.
Cool. And then I've got Miguel Marcos next.
Hi, everybody. This is my second book club. The first one was The Dawn of Everything. So you can tell how long it's been.
So number 1 and number 22.
So I'm not a Zettelkasten user. I'm interested in the note-taking aspect, everything that I can get out of the Zettelkasten for that purpose. And I'm dialing in from Madrid, working on multiple personal projects.
Cool. And then next I've got Pamela Wang.
Hi, I'm Pamela. I live in Singapore. I'm a PhD student in my final year, so I'm writing my thesis now. And I tried Rome early on, and then I joined the Rome book club, and I switched to Logseek, but I mainly use Obsidian now, usually for writing fiction and also to work on my thesis.
Cool. I'm super curious to hear how thesis workers are using these, because that's where they've been heavily used for a long time. I think next I have Eric, and then after that, Deepak.
So yeah, Eric Sinclair. I'm in Chicago. Similar to John, I'm an IT guy by day and evening since I'm often on call. I'm in a similar note to, I think, Pat, where I'm doing a decent job of fleeting, but it's getting things to main note and really linked and coherent, that I'm sort of using Bob's writing to help build out my practices of.
And Deepak.
Hi, everybody. I'm Deepak. I'm from India. I'm in Bangalore right now. It's almost 9 p.m. Over here. I've just started my Zettelkasten journey. I came across Bob's book on one of the forums, and I bought it, and I'm halfway through it. By profession, I'm into sales in one of large tech companies. My interest in Zettelkasten is to capture everything that I do, both professionally as well as in my personal life. I like to read a lot. So I want to create a knowledge base for myself. And from an apps perspective, earlier I was using Mem, then I moved to Reflect, and then I also have Heptabase. So the way I use it is that for Reflect, I mostly do my daily journaling and my work-related stuff. And Heptabase is something which I use for capturing my main ideas. And I'm trying to build a solid knowledge base over there. The only problem with Heptabase is it doesn't have a doesn't have a graph view. So that's my problem at this point in time. That's why
That was my problem with Rome, actually.
yeah, Heptabase has a problem, but otherwise it's a fantastic tool.
Cool. I've got Virginia up next, and then Roman.
Hi, I'm a minimum wage psychology instructor in the American South. I'm retired clinical psychologist who just lives for taking notes and writing. I have been throwing stuff into Evernote for probably 13 years now, long before I knew what a Zettelkasten was. I only discovered the system a year or two ago. Been through a couple of books on it. It just kind of created a lot of confusion and was thrilled when I found Doto's book. It's like, the light bulb. I want to say this is my first book club. I just discovered you guys this week, and I can tell I'm well over my weight class in here, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to lurk. Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
I will say that we are all of exactly the same weight class, so don't worry. Roman and then Dylan Jr. after that.
Hi guys. Yeah, I'm from Switzerland, and I'm started my kind of note-taking journey super early on already. When I was really young, but I never had a good strategy. It was a lot of paper and a lot of confusion and friction. So a few years ago, about now 2.5, 3 years ago, I started using Obsidian as my main note-taking and making tool, and read the matching books to like get into it, like Sven Cowen's book, and did also a light course, and which was really, really helpful. So, and I actually found this book club really by accident by looking something up, because I started reading Bob Doto's book, and yeah, I thought it would be a really cool thing to combine with the reading, go deeper into the whole structure underneath everything, because I see that a lot of things work for me, but there are still quite some gaps, and I like to, kind of fix those a bit. And for the work itself, I'm working in the film industry. Currently, I'm a writer's room assistant for a Swiss TV series. And for me, primarily, I use Obsidian and PKM as my life operating system. But I'm really curious about doing much more intentional work with it, and for the future, build a solid base for ideas, and then creating my own output. And I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you so much. The other name, Dan, thank you so much for troubleshooting this and getting me into it. Really
I'll say it's good to see another person doing screenwriting in the space using index cards, because that goes way back even to the 40s and 50s. And I know, what's his name? David Lynch is a huge index card guy. And he gets it from an old dean at the AFI who was doing it out of Europe in the 50s and 60s, I think. So,
okay. Who is the other screenwriting person here?
But I occasionally dabble. I've spent years as an agent and a manager, so
okay.
I've seen a handful of people doing this for a long time, but it's rare I run into somebody who says that they still do it. So,
okay.
Dylan,
well, we'll see.
Next.
Yeah, hi, my name is Dylan. I'm a musician by trade. This is my first book club meeting, and I'm still fairly new to the Zettelkasten method. I've been trying it for the last year or so. Kind of in the PKM space for a year and a half, so a little more than that. And yeah, just looking forward to hearing what everybody else thinks about the Doto book. I'm kind of just going to lurk here, I think, for the most part, but really appreciate being here. And also shout out to Dan and Chris for putting this together.
And then I see a gap. It looks like Tiffany, then Tim, then Mohammed, and we're through the list.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Tiffany. I am in Northern California, Bay Area. Professionally, I work in biotech. I'm a clinical research associate. I work on clinical trials for medical devices and pharmaceuticals. I actually studied English and public health, and I've done a lot of reading, but I took a lot of notes, but I feel like they get lost. They've gotten lost. I've used Evernote and OneNote, and I stumbled across the notion of a commonplace book that I've tried for a while, but then I discovered Zettelkasten. So I'm trying to work with that. I just started, I read Aaron's book. I read it and then it was confusing. And so I was excited about Doto's book because I feel like it'll really make things clearer. So because I want to, write and just keep track of my ideas. I feel like they get lost. I read something and it's like lost because I don't have a process for, keeping track of ideas. So I'm excited to be here and thank you for the allowing me to be here.
That puts Tim next, maybe.
So I've been around on this book club for all the books bar one, which was a book about books. So that was a terrible choice, but never mind.
Did you boycott Adler?
And in terms of notes, as much as many of the people here, around 2008, I've walked into OneNote, out relatively quickly into Evernote, stayed there a while, and then realized back when it was still version 6 that the linking was the big thing, and the ability to walk around a collection of notes that weren't necessarily in the same notebook even. So looked at Rome, looked at Obsidian, looked at Joplin as an intermediate more than anything between, because it looks like Evernote. It has most of the same functions and a basic Obsidian, and now finally this week have moved the last of the 35,000 notes over. But it's now,
that's a milestone.
Means that Obsidian takes about 3.5 hours to start. So I had to turn it back off and move the bulk of the unfluffed up notes into a separate vault, which will be opened under duress only. So, unlike with, who was it? Oh, Deepak, unlike most of you, I'm well out of the sequence, so it's only a mere 7:30 here, PM, as opposed to morning. So I can't drink coffee this late in a day, so sorry.
Yeah, hi all. My name is Mohammed Ali. I've been here once before, I believe, at the reading book club of Adler and Van Doorn. I only stayed like a few sessions though, so I'm hoping that I can make it to the end this time. I study history, and when it comes to this stuff, like the Zettelkasten and so on, and PKM, I've been fascinated by this for, I think, 2-3 years. I started using Obsidian. I came across, I think, like many people here, across the word Zettelkasten, and it was first like, oh, what the fuck is that? It's probably a German word. Got into that. Then I came across people like Chris and Bob, I did Bob's cohort actually 2 times even. So I know Bob quite well, and I'm like an avid practitioner of his of the Zettelkasten system in general. But like the way Bob presented his system within Obsidian, that I really kind of was kind of creating as well. Like the principles he teaches really helped me a lot. So it's great for me. I really love this topic, so I'm looking forward to it.
And I think, other than me, that wraps us up. If somebody else has jumped in and I've missed, let me know. So my name is Chris. I'm totally new to all of this. I don't think I've participated in the, 30 books or so that we've done before now. I've never seen Zettelkasten before in my life. I have no idea what's going on, but it should be an exciting.
You also don't know what a commonplace book is.
No, or Florilegium. This stuff, for all I know, could go back to Aristotle and even 65,000 years of human history before, and I would have no idea. So, I don't know. But
okay, so that is everybody, and that was sort of Chris's satire of what everybody else did. So, anyways, well, this is terrific. Thank you for everybody for being here. I am excited about this. I'm going to kind of use this, I think, as a way of trying to pull some things, trying to bounce off what Bob has done, and and kind of pull some additional things in and respond, maybe. And I've actually been thinking that the next time that I do, the thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to include reactions to the things that we've read and talked about along the way. The Aaron's book, which actually I think I also was in that Rome reading group, and that gave me, and then talking with Maggie, I think gave me the idea of kind of doing one on Obsidian. But that one, and and the Luhmann essay itself, and then the Schmidt and the Krajewski and all of those, I thought, well, I might as well put the notes that I made about them into a thing, and and kind of use them as a demo, because I like what Bob is doing with the active elements, as well as kind of putting examples up. But shall we begin chatting about this first section? I posted my initial thoughts, the things that that kind of appealed to me, or that I had responses to. And one of the things that I like best about this type of discussion is that I imagine everybody's going to have some similar responses and ideas, but I always like it when when somebody keys into an element or an aspect that hadn't even really occurred to me, that didn't jump out at me, because I think that adds a lot. So does anybody want to kind of get us started with a response or a reaction to kind of the whole thing, or focus on a specific issue?
I've got one, and it's half joking, half serious. As with many of these books on Zettelkasten, they of course mention Nicholas Luhmann. He's written, around 40 books, around so many articles and stuff, but nobody has an exact number. And I always find that funny, because it seems like that's something that should be very cut and dry. Somebody can go look it up, versus just pulling the Wikipedia thing of around 700 articles, 40 books, whatever. So on the more serious side, though, my goal for the note-taking is to be able to track kind of reference material and the stuff I'm commenting on for my podcast and stuff. And when I see things like that, where there's factual information that across the board nobody seems to either have or be able to track or something, it makes me wonder, is the Zettelkasten really the right tool for the kind of stuff I'm trying to do or not?
I will mention, because it's an interesting example that's not Luhmann, but there is a German-American researcher by the name of S.D. Goitin, who did research work on the Cairo Geniza, aka trash can of Jewish scripts that were found in Egypt in the mid-century. He has a Zettelkasten about a third the size of Luhmann's, but his written output is almost 3 times what Luhmann put out in terms of academic, both books and scholarly works, journal articles. And someone maintains, I don't know who it is, because there's a huge community that does research around that, but they've got a repository of all his books and articles. And at least 4 times this year, someone has added a new article they found that he wrote decades ago. In addition to which, there are still people who are technically adding new books to his works because they're using his notes and co-writing books based on his notes, which circulate in a digital form within that academic community. So people are still co-writing books with him years after he's died, which is not too dissimilar, I think, from who's it, Hegel, who has published more books post-death than he ever wrote in his life. And it's because people are mining his note content to churn those books out now, which is an interesting way of showing the power of what some of these methods do, that you can have that kind of afterlife.
And which has its sort of echo in Talmudic scholarship, right? And that sort of ongoing dialogue with long dead philosophers.
Wouldn't that be a great thing to put in a book of Luhmann himself wrote this many books and articles, and here's how many others have been written off of his notes since then?
Mm-hmm.
Although I don't think a lot of people are necessarily, usually they're writing books. If you're writing about Luhmann, you're using his books as the primary source material rather than his note card collection. Whereas in Goitine's case, literally someone, I think in the late 70s, early 80s, scanned them all. And if you know, are in the know and know someone who has them, you can get a PDF copy and go from there. But the form and shape of his collection is dramatically different than Luhmann's, which actually makes it a little easier to use to find the things you're looking for.
Has anyone done a compare and contrast in how that approach might be either better or worse, or at least just different or worth looking at versus the Luhmann type Zettelkasten?
I can count the windows in this room, and that's probably almost exactly the number of people who are aware of both Luhmann's collection and Goitine's collection simultaneously to be able to think about doing that. So for homework,
that's your book idea, Chris.
For homework, there you go, John.
Or article, that would be cool. I would take some time.
Yeah,
look at that.
I was curious what the question was again, shortly. So I think I got it like half, but like I was kind of curious to kind of if you can kind of repeat it.
My initial question was around how a lot of these Zettelkasten books give kind of a general number for how many books and articles Luhmann's written, and if that shows like a potential weakness in Zettelkasten for tracking facts and kind of reference material and stuff, or not. That was kind of the root question.
Oh yeah. So is it also pertaining to your own situation? If you're like considering like, if that might be a problem, like if you're gonna exactly okay.
I do.
I really don't. Yeah.
I do a podcast
I would
on
say.
comic books and just keeping track of the characters, the continuities, the creators, and stuff like that. It gets kind of complicated over time because I just don't have the memory for it anymore. When I was younger, I did, but so being able to track that stuff, I'm wondering, is the Zettelkasten really the right format for that or not? And if not, what would be?
Okay, I'm gonna so I would say that if you were to track, like I'm just gonna do a suggestion, but there's assumptions because I wouldn't really know actually because I've not been using it that long. But I think for tracking, let's say, characters within your comic books, are those the kind of things you're tracking comic like characters
Characters,
locations, maybe.
storylines, what's happened, sequence of events. Hey, it'd be the same thing if you were tracking like a historical event or something. What led up to this event? What did people know when?
Okay.
Things of that sort.
Yeah.
So I have noticed that, like other than the Zettelkasten, though it is part of the Zettelkasten, there's like the index, which is like I'm not sure if you have read the whole book, but Bob actually has a section on the index, which are essentially key terms. Besides my Zettelkasten, though it is part of my Zettelkasten, so I kind of use it and it's kind of weird. I have like an index which kind of tracks not only of like just general kind of academic topics, but I also track like people in my life, locations in my life, and so on. I also have fictional worlds which I track. They all go to my index. So I would assume that if I were to write a comic book and I needed to track a lot of characters, when the certain characters appeared in which edition, and you wanted to track that, you could make an index entry for those, and then you could kind of add them to the specific comic book chapter or whatever it is you wanted to do. That is kind of, I think, my approach, and it's actually part of the Zettelkasten as well. I think I'm assuming that the index might be helpful. That is kind of what I'm thinking. Yeah,
And I
does
was
that make
here for the
sense?
book club on the index books, and that was helpful in my thinking too. So that's good feedback.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, and I must say, I'm gonna say it, but like Chris has been like the person for me that has been the most helpful. He has a public hypothesis page, and just looking at the way he annotates and index, like that kind of kickstarted my own practice. I'm just gonna say it. Yeah, whatever.
And tags. I mean, that's one of the things that
Yeah,
I've
man.
struggled the most with
Tags.
over
Yeah.
time. It's been trying to figure out whether I even want to tag, and then if I do, how I'm gonna actually do it. I do think that the index and Chris, you're holding up Scott's book, and that was something of all of the flaws in Scott's approach. I thought that his focus on the index, I thought, was helpful for me to try to work through how I might want to do it. One of my projects involves kind of keeping track of a set of characters. So in a way, what you're talking about, John, all of the people in the Gilded Age, for example, who have the first Gilded Age, not the one we're in right now. But that's what I'm ultimately going to try to compare to each other. That it does seem like that's one of the things, and that's actually one of the things that conspiracy theorists do particularly well, I think, is to sort of keep track of these people and how they're connected and where where you can put them together with each other, and to say that that I don't know, J. Edgar Hoover and Cardinal Spellman were at this place at this time, or and I think that allows you at least to think about the plausibility of some of these theories and stuff. So yeah, I think that, and I do really appreciate the linking characteristics of Obsidian for that. I'm so far I've been very fascinated by the things that Bob says in this first section that he puts on his card, his note, in addition to the main obligatory must link to something else in the box thing, which he kind of waffles on a little bit, I thought. But then also additional links, what I tried calling sideways links in my own template that I was using to make notes in Obsidian. But then also where does it appear in your own writing thing, I thought was a really cool innovation.
One of the things, since we talk about tags and indexes and indexing, which is what essentially this all boils down to. Anytime you read a book or a paper or a thing, you're essentially creating a personal index of what was in it that you found interesting. So I've got 3 books here, including the one we're reading, and I find it hilariously interesting that none of these 3 books have an index. Admittedly, they're all self-published, which doesn't help. And it's always easier if you've got a big publisher behind you to force or pay someone to create an index for you. but literally 3 books about indexing and indexing methods, and none of them have an index. Although I will give some credit to Aaron's. This is the 2nd edition of his book. Technically, there is a page in the back that says index, but it's really just a repetition of the table of contents.
I'm curious, Chris, why you would for the topic that those books cover, why you would think an index is necessary. It doesn't seem like there would be such extensive vocabulary for this method.
So you would think that too, but and I would posit that to some extent, Bob's book is almost entirely a response to Aaron's not having enough detail about how to do this thing.
How to actually do it.
Yeah. Aaron's book really is, hey, there's this method that you can use, and I'm going to do a sketch outline of what it looks like. And everybody, if you go online, you can scroll through 4 or 5 years, or at least as far back as 2017 when Aaron's wrote his book. How do I do this thing? What's going on? And I guarantee you show up at one of the couple of forums, and within the next 2 days, you'll see somebody who says, I'm a beginner at this. How do I do it? Where do I start? I tried reading Aaron's book and So Bob writes a book, and the very beginning of it, he's got 3 or 4 pages about vocabulary and terminology. In fact, I think he had, for what he calls reference notes, he has 6 terms there almost, if not more, of other words that are used to describe.
Right, including the little used source note.
I find it interesting he doesn't use the phrase bib note.
Yeah, he missed that.
Maybe he boycotted it. Bibliographic note. He uses the longer name. So, but he doesn't shorten it the way many others will shorten it. But having some terminology, searchable things, 10 years from now, if I haven't written my own index on this, I'm going to rely on either the author's or the publisher's index to skim through the tail end of a book to see where was that thing I'm looking for. I know it's in there. How do I find it? And almost all nonfiction books will have indices. And as we discussed, I think in the book club Tim missed on books on books, or I'm presuming that's the one he was mentioning, but Duncan in his book talks about fiction books used to have indexes. In fact, I think Virginia Woolf in it wrote about a day that she was actually indexing her own fiction books. And we don't see that anymore. That's gone by the wayside in the publishing industry. Nobody indexes fiction anymore, within the book anyway. So if I want to know about, Shakespeare in Love, fortunately, if people index that stuff at that time, so I can look it up, but I can't anymore.
But for instance, we've got this relatively brand new book we're currently doing. It's not out in paper east of Suez, so I don't need an index. I've got an electronic copy.
Mm-hmm.
I can do better than your index because I can find every instance of the word "and," for instance.
Tim Duncan would argue that is not better because you're doing keyword finds as opposed to conceptual finds.
Yeah.
That's the distinction that he would make as a.
I was going to say earlier, but Chris went on a bit. But the thing that I like about this one so far is, first and foremost, is piped up and said, I'm going to use these terms, and sorry about this one, I don't agree with whoever, I'm using this term. That's fine. And all the way through my notes, I've been putting in the gardening metaphor equivalent, because I quite like I've forgotten what her name is now, but there's some early woman in the cycle of this field came up with a seed note, cultivation, product type metaphor, because that's what Doto seems to be doing, is
Wasn't that
start
Maggie
here
Delano?
to end up here with some content, hopefully. Maggie something, but
Maggie
not
Delano.
Maggie Delano.
Maggie Appleton.
Oh, okay.
Appleton,
Right.
that's the one.
That's the one.
And also, the other thing I've liked about the first chunk of this book is that it's come up with effectively picking over some of the best bits out of Dave Allen and Getting Things Done, because that's the last thing we all, in theory, want to do. We want to get something out the other end, as opposed to the collectivitis that is reported around so much.
Right.
And you get the likes of Curtis McHale pushing back against the simplicity, the ease at which you can collect. And as soon as you start to stop saying, today's my collection day, so I need to collect, and then because it's nice and easy, it looks productive, you do it again tomorrow, you end up with 30,000 notes quite easily, and you've done nothing with them. You've not indexed them, you've not tagged them, you've not had any form of organization, not really linked them across, probably, and therefore they're not much use for you currently in any output you suddenly decide you want, such that you then turn around and say, oh, hang on a minute, I need 20, 25 key papers or books that are essential to the subject I want to talk about, stroke write about. So I need to keep those at the top of the listing. And so you end up by making either a particular tag, or to make it even easier, you might make a key articles folder that links out of that folder or that notebook if it was in, say, Evernote format. And then you come around and say, so how many folders do you need to construct? And you get lots of people bouncing around between nominally 0 to everything, backwards and forwards. And that seems to be the other
or maps of content or something.
General issue that everybody's got, as in, do I have one Zettelkasten, or do I have a Zettelkasten within a series of different folders? Because that means I can pick up one rack. If you were thinking it from a librarian point of view, I've got the A to C, and then I've got the D to F type author's card index. I know I don't want to look everywhere every time if I'm just looking for Shakespeare. Do I look under W or do I look under S? It's only 2 places, I'm done. I don't want to start at the A's and check all the A's to get the author, William Shakespeare. So there's a speed issue. And then, of course, joy of joys, there's towards the end of the first chapter, second chapter, there's the energy item comes out from Bob as an example of a card that goes through the stages of manipulation, massaging, and it's a nice energy one. And it's like, okay, I've never done the calc, but how many years worth of energy did I save at my domestic level from my last big push project commercially? Because that's basically what I'm doing. I'm building engineer focusing on energy. And it's 3,500 years. I use so little anyway, but it was a big place, 42 hectares, et cetera, and knocked 10 million off the bill dollars. So that was fine. So there's a number of instances where this already, even sort of like first part, interacts with everything that's already in my listing, that it's going to be a joy to finish in that context.
Well, yeah.
So before you go further, though, that one of the first problems you talked about is that search and find is what Adler calls syntopical reading. So let's say I want to write an article about the collector's fallacy and how is collecting too much a good thing or a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, a few years back, Christian or Sasha wrote an article about the collector's fallacy. Is it good or is it bad? And yes, there are some good things and bad things about it, but until you've got enough research to prove that, what do you do? So you got to go read a whole bunch of things, but how do you find those sources? And the sources are very thin, but I've been doing this now for 4 years, so I can dump into the chat a link to every source I've ever seen or read where someone's talking about collecting, whether it's in this context or another. And now I have, I don't know, what was it, 49 references to collecting or the collector's fallacy. If you shorten it down to just collecting, I probably have 10 times that number. Sure. And I can find even more. But now I can sit down and query. I've queried my Zettelkasten, and I did it here digitally, and you can see that link. But I can now write a better essay on the collector's fallacy than they did 4 or 5 years ago because I have greater wealth.
But the ones you've missed, albeit something like Research Rabbit doesn't really do the social sciences, but if in terms of saying energy within hurricanes, seeing as it's quite topical for many of you at the moment, you put that into Research Rabbit and say, give me the things that aren't already in my collection called energy in hurricanes, and it'll come up with all the ones that are missing. So there are other tools that don't rely just on indexes and rely on whole text searching. And it seems a shame that if you move away from dead tree books, you've got more facility for search, and you've got in other tools, not so much Obsidian, but I thought at one point there was a move within the other older types of interlinked databases where I want this word and that word, but within the same paragraph. So I don't want the pair. I don't want Chris Aldrich. I want Chris and Aldrich in the same paragraph. And oddly enough, academically, I was doing those sorts of searches back in the 80s and 70s electronically. You could do that just about.
Right.
And now you can do it as a piece of cake, provided you've got the right tools. And at the moment, we don't have that search quite in Obsidian, but it's something that will drag out a whole pile of stuff that you could very easily start adding. And that was always my university days back in the 80s. The nice thing about dealing with paper was you could spend a day, and it would take a day to do a reasonable literature search just for the citation indexes, paper indexes, and then you go away and find them and then start triaging. Now it's just so easy to collect a big, vast number, and then you've got months of reading to triage, or you just randomly say, I've got this nice big long list, I've got 1,000+ papers, I'll go 1 in 5, or you go to something like Elicit and ask it, I've got this collection, search this collection, and tell me which ones can help me in the question I've got within the subject.
Well, I think Tim, I think it's a question of not. I mean, for me, what you're saying is it's not as much. I think for me, a question of am I going to do this completely, or am I going to have a kind of a complete version of this, but rather what is this going to gain me in my immediate project? And I think that maybe that's something that Bob will be. And I did just get a message from Bob. He's going to try to join us. Chris, did you share with him the Zoom link?
Yeah, he's got it. He's going to join us next week, probably.
No, he just told me he's going to join in the second hour.
Okay. Well,
yeah, because for whatever reason he's probably preparing for his wedding or something. But in any case, what since he does, since he's like a Buddhist practitioner, right? Maybe this issue of practice, because that's always been a challenge for me. Is okay, now I have all of these, and I used to spend a lot, maybe more time than I do now, creating double bracketing stuff in whatever I was writing, because I thought, oh, I'm going to go back to that at some point, and then actually building in a practice of going back and reviewing all of those empty nodes in Obsidian, and then actually deciding, do I really want to think about this or do I not? And if I do, another element of what Bob did in the first section that I really liked was that sleeping file, right? Where something is useful and you're going to get to it someday, but you're not going to devote your limited time right now to it. But I also, before you respond to him, I want to go back to Chris, because what you mentioned right at the beginning of what you were saying was the Dave Allen book, right? The Getting Things Done. And I think, Chris, didn't you object to that in some place I was just looking? Oh, I think it was in your hypothesis, but I wasn't able to go to. All I'm able to see in hypothesis, because it's illegal to go to the thing you read, is the quote and then your reaction to it.
It was probably a reference to the phrase that, and it's probably one of the most off-quoted phrases in Tim Allen's book. The essence of it is the mind is meant for thinking up things, not for storing them. Mm-hmm. And because of all my research into anthropology and sociology as it relates to indigenous cultures, I find that specious on its face. Right. And
you're Mr. Memory Palace.
It's the sort of, I got 2 feet of memory treatises behind me here. But it's the sort of thing that only a privileged person in a literate society would ever say. And not only that, but a literate society that just has so totally sidelined memory that it's useless.
It's a facile comment. It's glib. It's facile.
Yeah, but there's a kernel of truth in it, though, isn't there?
If you're totally living in a literate society and you don't rely at all on your memory, but even then, and I would contend, so there's one of my favorite examples of the thinnest, most facile, commonplace book / Zettelkasten, and we can totally call it a Zettelkasten because it's literally slips of paper in a box, is the one owned by a kid named Marshall Mathers, who's a multi-millionaire now because of his Zettelkasten. Most people know him better by the name Eminem, but it's literally just scribbles in a box. And there is an interview of him showing it to Anderson Cooper, and Anderson Cooper literally sidelines it and calls it like the scribblings of a madman. I don't think he used the word Unabomber, but that's what everybody in the audience is thinking as they see this interview. You've got this Unabomber treatise in a box, but he's using it to actively write and create music and lyrics.
Yeah,
and do the thing that he does.
There's a radio station where you've got rappers coming in and out of the building where I work, and they're all scribbling like this. Anyone, a poet or a writer, does this.
But the broader point is, unless you can write it down or have a means of remembering it, may be lost. But there is more of a brain and memory connection. And people are like, oh, there's Eminem's Zettelkasten is not a Zettelkasten because there are no links. And I find that totally specious because all the links are kept in his brain. Most of his papers are, he's got 30 different colors of paper in there. And a lot of it is hotel stationery.
Mhm.
But the fact that he very likely can visually remember what color paper or what color pen or what the stationery looks like means he can go through that box probably pretty quickly and find the thing he knows is there,
Mhm.
even if he can't remember exactly what it is. Oh, I know I wrote about this type of subject on this type of paper. All those links are in his brain, and he can find them in that box. Or even if he can't,
Yeah, but
many of us can.
But as you had a little while ago, you had people co-writing with a dead author. If you can't explain the hotel colour of the stationery and the crayon colour I used to do it, nobody's going to co-write a song with NMM's lyrics on that scrap of paper. But before we get into that,
they may not do it while he's dead. You're probably not going to do that. But if you're co-writing it, you have him as the resource to find the thing you need because he'll remember it.
But the whole thing about the guy we spoke about, the Gotting person we spoke about earlier, is that they are still writing post-mortem books with that person because the Zettelkasten is accessible. But what I wanted to come back in on was Dan and his sleeping note item. That's exactly Dave Allen's Someday Maybe.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Right? You have his original plan was, what are you going to do next week? Here's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You don't know where this one goes, or you can't be bothered to look at it this week or next or even this month. So it's a someday maybe. That's the extra folder. That's where you get 34 folders from, because you've got the 31 day folders for this month, etc., etc. So everything that is not, but everything that's not planned for this month goes into someday maybe. As a metaphor, that's where you put, I can't deal Zettelkasten wise with this collected note this week or whatever period you want to pick. And you have it in the sleeping folder as per Bob, or you put it in the someday maybe. Because it's a task.
And then it becomes a question of sort of practicality. That it elevates itself when it's actually of value to you. So that's sort of an organic way of testing your own self. I think there's an argument to be made for sort of making an investment. I'm watching the chat go by, and this idea of the struggle of sort of keeping up with these things. I think there's a value in making that investment, assuming that these things that kind of jumped out at me, yes, I should pursue them a little bit, but in an instance of limited time, that's the question: is what am I going to work on today?
Can I comment? On this? So first of all, I think Tim kind of confused a few things. The 31 days is like a tickler file, which is different from a someday maybe. Someday maybe is just a flat list of stuff, which is different from a next action list, which is different. Can I finish?
The original paper is 34 files, not 31.
You're right.
So it's one for every day of the month that you plan,
for the month,
and then there are a couple of others.
But it's a tickler file. Okay, can I finish? So the someday maybe, and then the next actions, which is as soon as possible. And then I'm gonna make like the overall GTD. The funny thing is, when I was doing a beta read of Bob's book, I actually made a bunch of annotations relating to GTD because Bob is, of course, heavily inspired by GTD. That's very obvious from reading the book, at least to me. The sleeping folder's kind of an example of that. And I wanted to kind of comment on Chris because he brought it up. The quote, which I thought was interesting, is I would say, first of all, like in a literate society, because there's so much information, it is so much that, and of course, we don't have memory techniques anymore as much kind of in the culture. But I would say that because there's so much information and there's so much, and I think Forgetting Machines also kind of talked about this, that the more technology, we get more technology and we we have more information, we actually write down more stuff, but then we forget it, of course. I think it kind of plays into that kind of concept of like forgetting machines. And David Allen kind of refashions it in a kind of almost like a kind of a Zen-esque practice, in my opinion. It's like emptying the mind, right? I think the thing about the getting things done and emptying your mind is it's kind of about your direct experience and consciousness. I think, of course, the brain and the mind can hold on to information because it constantly does. But I think what Ellen is trying to do with this process is kind of empty the mind of like, oh, I need to get cat food, or I need to get this, I need to do this, I need to do that. And a lot of people have all of that stuff constantly kind of cycling in their head, and they're constantly reminding themselves via their brain. And what Ellen is essentially, I think, trying to say with that quote is that you shouldn't be holding it into your, and definitely in an age where there's a lot of information. So that's what I wanted to say on that. And I'd like a bunch of more ideas about getting things done in the relationship with Zettelkasten, but I will leave it at that.
Yeah.
I think
and I think Florian's made a good point about getting back to the book. But I'm sorry, go ahead. Someone was just going to start.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say that the emptying your mind part is also what the 750 words practice, like the Think Like an Artist book, also does the same thing. And like Sonke Ahrens kind of says, you don't think in your head, you're supposed to think on paper. And it's more of the idea that you think, like you think you can think in your head, but everything that makes sense in your head might not necessarily make sense on paper. And I found that to be kind of like a guiding principle of when I was trying to work on my Zettelkasten, because a lot of realizations come only when you write it out.
Yeah, it's that idea of you not only have to make it clear to yourself, but you have to make it clear to others, an audience, especially if you're writing for an audience.
Yeah.
In fact,
I really love that thinking equals writing thing that was, that I think goes all the way back to, Kommunikation mit Zettelkasten, from Luma.
Yeah. Which I also don't like either, because that presupposes indigenous peoples for the last, 65,000 years have not been already doing this.
Haven't been thinking.
Yeah.
They had a richly developed oral tradition, and that's that whole Candy-Wrong story. So.
Yes. Well, people don't want to admit it, but even things like the Iliad and the Odyssey literally were entirely done inside someone's head, and it was passed down, that story. Someone memorized it start to finish. Multiple peoples did it start to finish, and almost no one in the modern world has memorized that. Now there are more people who've memorized the Bible or large portions of the Bible or the Quran. If all the copies of the Quran were burned today, it would take less than 4 hours for it to be recreated entirely from memory, word for word, exactly. Because there are enough people who have done that. But, is anybody going to do that? Just to pick up a random example with Bob's book, possibly not. But does that mean it's not useful to do that? I don't know.
Well, I think Pamela, the Kipu example is kind of interesting. That I had always I watched YouTube videos about the grad student at Harvard or wherever he was that started to sort of try to decode the Kipu, and apparently there's a little bit of credibility to that story, but to go the direction that Chris is going, it makes even more sense to me if knots don't mean a particular thing, but they're memory palace items, right? They're locations in a mental map rather than the analogies of words. Oh, here comes Bob. Hey, Bob, welcome.
It may take him a second to get audio.
Okay, now he's got audio. Welcome, Bob. How are you doing? Another second.
Got it.
There you go. Hi, nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Hi.
Well, we were just we're rambling all over the place. We were just talking about Pipus and memory palaces and things like that because Chris is trying to subvert the idea of a text-based world.
Uh-huh. I've seen him make those attempts.
But first of all, congratulations on your upcoming wedding. What we've done for this meeting today is we're kind of covering the first third, so about the first 75 pages.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I hope this is okay with you all. I'm happy to sit in, and I don't want to let anyone feel censored.
Well,
I was going to say something, but now I'm not.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, hey, Florian, nice to see you. I'll tell you what you should have said is that I forgot to cite you something, and I'm aware of it, and I need to do it in the next edition. So I'm sorry about that.
Oh, it's okay.
It's coming.
Next edition.
Well, I will admit that one of my favorite parts of the book, before you even get to page 1, like page 0 on the copyright page, Bob has the phrase in a block just under the copyright. Please cite the author and book when quoting, which is literally you don't even need to get past the copyright page, and he's already giving you good advice.
Well,
already kind of the whole theme.
It's internet practice to ignore even CC by SA 4.0 international and not cite the author.
Mm-hmm.
So
when that's all they've asked you to do, right?
Right. So I can't blame Bob for that. By the way, what I found most useful in the first part, and that's probably because I have some experience with Zettelkasten, was the example of the reference note and the point that Luhmann's notes were marginalia. They're telegraphic. That to me was probably the most useful part as I was going over it. Just a comment. As far as inboxes and sleeper folders, I just notate. I just tag notes in my Zettelkasten. I don't really keep them separate. So there's a lot of junk, effluvia floating around. So
I thought that was brilliant, though. I thought the idea of a sleeping note was really useful. I'm going to comment on that in the next version of my thing. Actually, I'm going to use Bob. I'm going to use your book as a provocation for my next edition, which I was planning on adding a kind of an Adlerian reading element to it, but yeah, I think I'm going to kind of react to what you did too.
Awesome. Love to see it.
So what other things? Let's tell Bob what else kind of jumped out at us, and maybe some of the newer people who haven't been hogging the microphone.
Hi. Not to anger Florian, but a bit circling back to the GTD for me, not to the GTD, but the analogy. For me, it was very useful to create the workflow-based folders, not just the sleeping, but I started my Zettelkasten based on the idea that everything is in one box. And I'm doing it in Obsidian. And so I started with no folders. And for me, it was very useful. Partly the part where Bob talked about that keeping a Zettelkasten is a long time, so you have to look at it like a lifestyle or a long time process. And for me, it was very useful to break my things into these workflow related folders. Like I have raw notes like brain dumps, and reference notes in a different folder, and then I think sleeping, and then the main notes, something like that. This was a very cool thing that added for me.
Yeah, I don't like to be there. So he was outside when I spoke to him about an hour ago. Okay. Cool. So... It has been a while since I read the book, because it's one of the first nonfiction books I read, but it's one of my favorites. That's why I joined. Hello, Chris. So
I think that's Matthew is like background noise, or am I like mishearing something? Is it like someone else? Like I think it was Matthew. Did he just join or something? I don't know what this is.
Somebody's got a
Was that
video
Matthew?
going.
Yeah, where are you, Matthew?
Matthew's not here.
I think it's Matthew.
It sounded like
It's his
Matthew.
voice. It is his voice. I'm like looking at the attendees list. I don't know what's happening actually. Right?
Somebody have a video on?
Video playing in the background. And
yeah, it sounds like a video.
My fault. Sorry. I was when I just popped that link into the chat, it actually launched the video, and that confused me quite a bit because I was
like, "Where's Matthew Vanderhorn joined?"
That was Matthew. Yeah.
It's like what? Yeah.
Mr. Horn. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I turned that off, but yeah, there are a bunch of videos from that. From the How to Read a Book in my Substack. And so I posted the link to the first one. Sorry about that, guys.
I have a question for you, Bob.
Oh, sure.
So I know you've been doing this for a while, and I see you as writing a book that is both helpful for the beginner, but you're also, and it may not be abundantly apparent as people start, but you're having a conversation with Aaron's, you're having a conversation, whether you like it or not, with Scott Shepper here, and everybody else who's written about some of these things. And I'm curious if while you were writing this, you were specifically thinking, not I'm just writing for a beginners coming into this space, but how much time did you spend thinking about how much you're having a conversation with the other writers about other books in this space?
Yeah. I mean, the thing that was on the top of my mind was giving people, because I interact with so many people, like in Reddit, a number of you do, on Reddit and then the Obsidian Discord and stuff. And there's so many repeat questions and so much confusion, obviously. My sort of focus was like, how can I present a comprehensive vision of what's going on now? Like where it came from. So let's start, I don't go back as far as you. I leave that to you willfully. So I okay, Lumen sort of had this interesting take. This is where we get like the so-called literature note. This is what people are sort of doing with it now. And this is what some of the more vocal people are saying about it, right? And I do that with kind of a number of the different aspects of the Zettelkasten practice as it stands. My hope was to kind of move the conversation out of what is a literature note and into like, okay, now I know like what a literature note is, or at least what the common like understandings of it are. And now I can talk about like how these things function. Are they useful? Is it useful for me? Is it, move it into like function use value kind of conversation rather than like a what is conversation. Mm-hmm. So inevitably I wanted to cite people and show people who've been talking about this, at least the people I had read. There's obviously a lot of people that are talking about this that I didn't mention. And I really had to just draw a line. I was like, these are the people who I was informed by and who I have responded to. So I'm just going to work with those people in this book.
What
Go
are you going to say to Umberto Eco when you meet him in heaven? Exactly. Or wherever that place is,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's going to be awkward.
Yeah, I know. There were so many people. I mean, even in like the original it might have even been you. There was a few people in those beta reads who I had started to bring in more people, and like sort of as an honorific, being like, my work is not necessarily based on these people, but these people preceded me. And then a number of people were like, we don't need to know. That's like too many names. And I was like, okay, I'm going to like dig one hole, not like 10 holes here. So yeah, Umberto got kicked. Some of the other early ones got kicked, but yeah.
I've actually been playing with the idea of sort of bringing tangents in to a text, but having them, and I really like the way you did the print version of the kind of the linking thing with mentioning the page and paragraph. I think is a great way. If you've made something in an Obsidian vault, for example, and then you want to say, oh, I've got this tangential response to Schmidt's article or to Luhmann or to or a deeper an even deeper tangential dive into Echo or something like that. Have them still exist but be out on the edge of that cluster.
Yeah, it was writing about Zettelkasten in like a comprehensive way. I found very challenging because you inevitably, because of the nature of writing, you're presenting it like step one, take a fleeting note, step two, and it's not how it functions. You know what I mean? Like we're kind of doing all at the same time, and maybe we jump ahead and we go back. So there was a point where I was like, it wasn't like a clever, not that this is what you were saying, but there was a point where I was writing it and being like, I'm going to put these references to other parts of the book, not as like a clever nod to like the Zettelkasten, but like only more so because I wanted people to be like, oh, if I'm here, I'm in chapter 6, but it's informed by chapter 1, because fleeting notes inform your later.
Sure. I think it's nice. It's great to demonstrate the process too.
Yeah, and particularly I like that you did it with a lot more care and caution in your book than Scott Shepherd does. Like literally every page and a half, we'll talk about this thing more later, but he doesn't give you the link to where the later actually happens. And when you've got a 600-page book, you can't do that.
But then it also, I think then writing a book on Zettelkasten and instead see him as marketing a rebrand of Zettelkasten, and the book is a function of that marketing. And I don't mean that like as a put down. I have opinions on that, but that's not how I mean it in this instance. Like when you understand Scott's writing as a way, all-encompassing marketing campaign, his style, it's coming up soon, the kind of Gary Halbert kind of approach, it all makes sense. His book makes a lot more sense when you understand it as like someone who is attempting to create a very large advertorial for a funnel, a marketing funnel. Again, no shame on that. That's people do that, but that is what that is. And all of a sudden it becomes like, oh, that's why this is so, off the charts, because it's not about that. It's a marketing thing. And so, I just put that out there just to be like, I think people struggle with Scott a little bit and be like, what's going on here with this? And it's like, that's what it is, so.
I'm less inclined to give him the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
Because I think that my time is valuable. I don't know why. I mean,
look at all those yellow books. Of course it's valuable.
Well, I think that issue of utility, and we were kind of discussing that a little bit earlier because Tim was sort of arguing for a process of or at least talking about a process of sort of incorporating everything. And I used to spend a lot of time sort of creating empty nodes in Obsidian just by double bracketing things that I thought I would come back to. And I like, one of the things I really like about what you've done is your focus on sort of process and actual steps and practice. And I imagine this comes from Buddhism, right? That there's, that you set aside some time to actually practice this process with some type of a belief that the stuff that you don't focus on today will ultimately be useful to you. So it makes sense. It'll pay you in the long run. The investment will pay off to go back and do that. My time constraints lately have I'm scrambling, so I just focus on the thing that I immediately need and hope that I'll come back. But then sometimes I do go back and review all of those empty nodes and say, do I really want to pursue this, or do I want to, unbracket those things, and then maybe they'll pop up in a unlinked reference search or something.
Yeah. Yeah, I try not to do those empty double brackets only because I am not likely to go back to them. I make it as real bare bones as possible, because any other, adding anything else to it is it's just not my way.
One of the things I liked that you added that I hadn't seen before was the "where in my own work does this appear" thing that you put on your main node.
Oh yeah, yeah. You mean the C, like used in?
Yeah, right.
Used in. Yeah, yeah. I started having to do that because I'd use an idea, and especially when I was trying to like push out these kind of 101, like what is a fleeting node? What is this kind of thing? I really needed to just keep track of like, have I said this already? I'm also like 46 now, and I'm like, I don't remember it all, and I'm like, I don't know. Did I say this? Is this the exact words? Is that going to be weird? So I actually, for sanity and for not, making a gaffe, I put that in there. But I do think it's useful.
F said something in the chat about, would it be fair to say that the declarative statement that serves as the title will often be the single idea of the main node?
Yeah. So yes, I got that practice from Matushak, right? So he was the one who sort of like talked about that, at least in my world. That's where I saw it. And he, bless him, is much more, I get the impression that he is much more methodical and thoughtful and considered on his moves. Now, he may be just as much of a moron as I am, but I don't get that impression. So for me, the title, yes, it is like a condensed kind of version of the note, but sometimes it's like the lead in of the note, like the note might be 3 sentences and it might be the first sentence and I just repeat it. But it's just my nature. Maybe it's because I'm a Taurus. I don't know, but I like things to be a little kind of loose. And so on the whole, it is like a succinct way of saying what's in the note. It's an indicator. So I kind of know what I'm saying when I come past the note, rather than I do the example, like, apples and oranges. It's like, well, what am I saying? Versus like, apples are not oranges. So yes, it is a succinct version of that. But again, for me, it can be a little loose too. But yes. So yes, and.
Yeah. Yes, and that's the world. That's the world we live in.
Yeah.
Hi, Bob. Can I ask something?
Oh, hey,
comment on something. Hey, how are you doing? Yeah, good, man. So what you said was like really intriguing about like trying to write a book about Zettelkasten in a linear fashion, of course, but like you're working with a nonlinear system, which has all of these different practices and methods. And essentially, this is also what Adler and Van Dorn say in their book of like, when you're reading, you're like doing all of these different things. You're like, you're reading on different levels, right? And you're reading multiple books and you're trying to bring them together. But what Adler says in his book is that the real mastery, or like the art of reading, is that that these different parts become one act. That they become so ingrained. Do you also see that? And I really like this idea because it also has like a kind of a mystical element to it, because it's like the one, right? Like kind of everything kind of being one, and then it kind of functions well. Do you also think that's kind of the case with the Zettelkasten, that whenever it becomes one thing, all of these moving parts, and you're not consciously busy with it anymore, that it kind of works the best? Perhaps I'm not sure if works the best is the best phrasing there, but
I mean, if you're asking me personally, yeah, I think it's like anything, you know, like parts of it function like stepwise, you know, where it's like I'm doing this and next I'm going to do this. And then at other times it's all kind of informing itself as you go, because, you know, that was the sort of like thing with my little weird loops in the beginning, you know, the system loops. You know, it's like I'm taking a main note, but that's also informing what I'm in. You know, if I take a main note, make a main note out of something, and it's exciting to me, and I like it, and I'm like, oh, I really captured that. Well, all of a sudden, my interest in that topic is probably a little heightened, a little more quickened. So now I'm thinking about that in the world, and I see something that reminds me of that. So now it's informing that. So they're all kind of, you know, I didn't get too much into that because I really wanted people to be like, this is what this is and this is what that is. But it's inferred that, yeah, you know, these different parts of the process are informing other parts of the process, so that it does become kind of a self-feeding, like linked Ouroboros kind of thing, you know, if that's what you're referring to. So yes, all one, sure. And, you know, I could certainly go down that path if you wanted to, you know, the mystic, like what does it imply at these other layers, but not to bore other people who aren't interested in that. But yeah, certainly for me.
Yeah, and do you also think that writing is part of that cycle, so that the act of writing kind of also kind of functions within that kind of moving, like these different practices coming together, and that writing is also somewhat part of that.
Sure. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. I like the fact that I think you went kind of in the same direction as I did, and Tim has something to say about atomic notes as well. But the idea that you're really not going to go back and evergreenize a note by constantly updating it and rewording it and especially eliminating stuff. Because one of the things, you know, as a historian, I'm mostly focused on change over time, and I want to see how my own thought process evolves as well. And so I sort of use daily notes kind of to do that part of the time. But I do like the idea of atomicity, and I do sort of like the idea of having one idea in a particular note, which is kind of swimming against the current for me, because I tend to write in 1,500 word essays. And then I have to go back in and say, okay, what was it? You know, it's a train of thought that sort of evolved as I was having it and writing it down, but where did it go? And I try to go back and assess that and put some words to the individual ideas as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Andy, I don't know how many of you read that, but Andy published a recent essay that talks about, like, in retrospect, like, okay, now I've had this stuff out, like, how did it actually work out into articles and stuff? And if I recall, I think he's pretty explicit that he does go back. I mean, to him, these documents are like living documents. I don't know that he deletes things, but he's in this, for someone who has spoken about atomicity, he is definitely in this more kind of, or rather he has a more fluid relationship to the single note. You know, it does morph, it does change, it becomes these things, which is very exciting. I hesitate to take him up on it, because I just really need to just stick with the one thing that I'm doing. But
especially if it's working.
Yeah, you know, but it is fun to watch him, anyway, to bring it back to him. But yes, atomicity, so important with this specific kind of work, I believe.
Yeah. Tim, did you want to jump in? Tim, do you want to jump in?
Happy to hear the answer.
Okay. Did that answer what you were getting at?
Well, I saw the Andy Matristic piece, and in many cases, I'm coming from, and I've mentioned her in the past, and somebody I think has already mentioned her today, Morgan, whoever, up in Toronto. She shows how she does it on YouTube, such that she's collecting some quotes and collecting references and citations, and then pushes it into an essay, but she pushes it into an essay in Word. But she never says she puts the whole thing back to pick up, particularly with what you said about your 1,500 words, and Pat and I in the past have mentioned, we're in the 6,000 to 8,000 word essay type bracket because of that's how we were taught at school, etc., etc. Because you're not making an idea, you're making an argument. It's it's a whole thing. It's not just the idea. And I like the fact that because Obsidian allows you to have folders, you could put all your output into an output or a published folder and then constrain the search to that folder and say, show me where I've mentioned the word, in my case, energy saving or sustainability or dead palm trees or whatever, and see whether it actually is a thing that I produce or have spoken about or have an idea about, to then say, oh, I now need to do effectively a part 4 on that narrow piece and build it up to something. And that, as I say, I've not finished the book yet because in theory we're only doing the first part, but all the atomic stuff is in chapter 4. Not read that bit yet, but that's for next week in theory. And as I said earlier, it's because it's such a new thing, it's not published here yet. And that's east of Suez for Bob because you missed the first part. Hence, not coffee, but some good old yellow stuff. And there are so many people that are pushing the atomic stuff, but they also never seem to then follow through with, but I can't do atomic content. I can't satisfy, the New Statesman with a 150 word, not even a blog post, it's a comment on Facebook type thing, as opposed to, here's a piece, I want paying for that because it's 6,000 to 8,000 or even at a push, 2,500 words output, but it's got maybe 10 the works or the ideas within 10 atomic notes. But I like the idea of being you've mentioned today, and it's come up before, as in search your own notes. I mean, the other place it's come up is people are saying, point the AI summarizer at your works, ask it to summarize, and also ask it to then come up and give you in your tone, in your voice, a writing prompt, and then you build up on that. But you've got to have a container that doesn't have 35,000 atomic notes in it, has a couple of hundred articles, and that seems to work too in that sense. And it was just a case of, was there more on that? And I think also there's an element of, Pamela's picked up on the outliner thing. The people who made Obsidian first product was Dynalist, which was a much more log-seq looking like outliner. And that's where I picked up on them from. And that's why I went to Obsidian easily, because I knew I had a relationship with them at a distance such that I understood their position, etc., etc. And it was the nice thing is that that's where the plugins come in. And unfortunately, it's not really there in the core product, but core plugins and extended plugins give you a pretty good outliner, but not as smooth yet as, say, Dynalist or Logseq even.
Pat, do you want to throw something in here, because you've been sort of an advocate over the last several things in this, in the PCAM genre that we've read for different types of automation, and I've been sort of resistant to automating my, especially my Obsidian Vault.
Well, I do find that the smart connections plugin in Obsidian is useful for presenting um, artificially intelligence bound references in your own notes, and it works very simply and very quickly. It to me, it takes some of the drudgery of going through and linking things away from my responsibility and lets the machine do what it does well. I particularly want to ask Bob about the process of converting notes into writing, because this is the part that I find to be the most difficult. And I'll just cite Aaron's book and Shepard's book as examples of how not to do it, basically cutting and pasting notes. So what is the secret of converting notes into writing?
I wish there was one secret, but there are some things. And I do mention them in the later chapters of the book, but of course only briefly. But for me, it's important, and it has always been, even when I was in school, like even not so much in high school, but in college, it was always important for me to just get something on the page. So that's where I got in the habit. I don't do this as much anymore, but I see it when I ever listen to Ryan Holiday, and Ryan Holiday's like a quote capturer. I mean, that guy, he writes around quotes. But so your notes, your so-called atomic notes, are essentially quotes in some ways. There might be your own voice, they might be, rephrasing someone else, whatever. But for me, that's how I start, is I get those ideas onto the page, and with a little bit of I don't want to say talent, but like I have a panache for writing. So I would get excited about writing. So when I have these ideas in front of me, I kind of immediately start filling them out. I immediately start saying, oh, well, someone else said this. Let me see if that works. And I'll put this in here. And I basically build writing. And this is, I definitely talk about, like, I refer to this concept of bricolage, where you're taking things and making a seemingly seamless whole out of it, which is all just to say, I bring stuff onto the page and then I start to like form something out of it. And by that, I mean, I start adding text, I remove text, I move things around. So it's less like I'm starting at the top and writing, and more like I'm starting in the middle and building out. I'm jumping over here. And then over time, that starts to look like something. And I have to make a decision. Do I like the way this looks, or do I want it to look differently? And then that becomes the dance, the dance of the sad clown, happy clown dance of writing, which is like just the process, which is, fun, exciting, depressing. It's all the things, right? Once you're in the thick of it. But again, to get started, and I do meet a lot of people online who have this, who struggle to get it from the note to the prose. I recommend put it on the page, like get it there and start organizing it, and be like, do I need more here? And a lot of times, if you're not like studying how to write, it's a feeling. You say something and then you jump to another one. You're like, that's just real. That's a big jump. I need like a little padding here, so it's, I don't know if I'm being helpful here, but that's how I do it. That's how I like to do it. And that's what gets me excited to do it, is just having those ideas on the page, structuring them in a way that kind of starts to make sense, filling in the blanks, filling in the gaps. And if it's a small article, then that could be enough. If it's a longer piece, it could require more.
Yeah, I think
I thought the promise of the Zettelkasten, at least according to Aaron's, was that this was supposed to be a way station, or a repository of finished ideas that one would then incorporate into one's writing. So I kind of disagree with Aaron's when he says that you should write your notes as if for publication.
Well, it's different than
I'm not sure that's terribly helpful, in my experience anyway.
Part of what I see him saying when he says that, though, and there's kind of a hidden quality to some of the hypothesis notes I write, And it happens in part because I know there is an audience. There are more than 10 people following the RSS feed of my personal notes, which I find to be just stupid, honestly. But there are people who read them. And in some sense, by writing maybe a little more than either I ought to or I should, I'm making actively better notes because someone might be reading them. And if I can't be clear on the page to that invisible audience, then I might not be clear to my own future self. I might not remember what I wrote. But then to go to Pat's question, sometimes I find that tiny little box I'm writing in, and it's the same thing that happens on Twitter, is it's easier to write into a tiny box or on a tiny note card versus a huge sheet of paper. You get a big blank sheet of paper and it's saying to you, you need to fill me up. You can't just write 2 lines and be done. So in Hypothesis, often I'll start writing a short note and the proverbial muse will strike me, and suddenly that short 2 sentences turns into a full-blown essay. And I'll save it, and I might come back to it and clean it up and then post it as a longer article. But when the muse shows up, you need to pay attention. You need to get that, what does your gut say? And you may not have all the details to find it now. And I use the letters TK for to come, which is a common editor's device, because the letters TK they appear in almost no English words. So when you do a search for the letters TK, you'll find the holes in what you've written. So I'll write a little snippet and TK it and come back. But when the muse hits me while I'm writing that short note, I'll put in a full essay. And you can go through my notes on Hypothesis and see that happening. Doesn't happen often, but when it does, that's where the gold is. And you need to realize when it does how to do it and how to handle it, and then be able to come back to it later and polish it up and clean it up.
But Steve, Chris, you went out and bought 40,000 index cards, and I've still got about 3,000 A0 pages to deal with, because that's what I took out the drawing office. But yeah, there are the little box, stroke Twitter, stroke whatever, I think is a good idea. And that, of course, you can do within Obsidian. You can shrink it down, or you can put in a theme that says, show me 5 lines, and the middle one of those 5 lines is where I'm typing. So you can focus quite closely if you wish to, and you can flip it. It's easy to flip. But I think do it as a Twitter, even as a large Twitter, as we now do 240 characters instead of 140 or whatever it was. It can be a good idea.
One of the things that I spend a lot of time talking to my students about is paraphrasing rather than quoting. And that it's important, even with that there's a journey that knowledge or information makes from its original source to being your own knowledge or your own understanding, and that there are steps along this way, and that paraphrasing is an element of that. You still have to cite, but you're on your way to kind of making stuff your own. And I think you mentioned that in this first section, Bob, as well, that that's part of the process is, put it in your own words, say something brief about it in a title that is sort of in the active voice rather than the passive voice kind of thing. And I think that's really helpful.
Yeah. I mean, the book, that was another constraint I put on myself, was to really focus on writing and not, yes, it is like a 101 on Zettelkasten and that kind of stuff, but I used writing as like a filter. So yeah, talking about paraphrasing, these are all things that just help writers get into the mood of writing. If you have, paraphrasing is fine, but it's really great if you're a writer, because you need, you probably want to say it in your own words anyway. So it just gives you more copy to work with, get your brain thinking. So yeah.
Well, and also it also actually provides, when I was a kid, I had notebooks that I would just transcribe out moving quotes, right? Things that grabbed my attention, and I would transcribe them out in, verbatim, and then I would use them in essays or whatever in English class. And but along the way, I realized that the reader, whether it was my teacher or other students or whoever, wasn't necessarily going to see the same thing in the thing that I quoted. They were not. I started out by sort of assuming I will say this thing from this book, and everybody will immediately interpret it the same way and get what I'm saying. And then I realized that wasn't really working, and I had to put some, not even padding, but I had to put some context around it, and that kind of made it more, along the way, even if I was quoting it, made it more personal too.
Definitely, yeah.
So we have about come to the end of our 2 hours, which is what we normally allot for this. And we normally get here, and sometimes we go over a little bit. And we can certainly, I mean, since Bob is here, this is a great opportunity, and that's a great reason to go over if people want to continue talking. Anybody have a preference?
I'm good to stay for a bit longer.
Okay. Who wants to continue the conversation? Who wants to carry it in their direction?
Or if you've got questions, especially. I know there were at least a handful of beginners who haven't done this as much as some of us, who have a few drawers full of index cards ready to go up in flames. Which isn't always a bad thing.
I'm rather a beginner, but I know that my blocks are inner ones, so I'm not sure how my questions would move this forward unless we turn this into a therapy session. So I'm rather just listening to the conversation, but I'm enjoying it very much.
Okay. Bob, I have a Substack that I'm recording this, so I'm going to edit it lightly. I will probably not take I'll take the ums out because that happens automatically in Vimeo now, but I'm not going to go through and find all of the likes and sorry, Pat. And I will post the video, and then and I'll send you the link to that so that as we continue in the next few weeks, you'll be busy doing other things, but you're welcome anytime to kind of chime in and respond to things or clarify things that we get wrong or whatever. That would be great.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'd love to hear
okay
what's coming up for sure.
Cool.
I don't know if you did it on purpose, and I didn't really realize it until recently, but I appreciate that I got a tiny little fleeting note in the copy of my book. He wrote it on a slip and tucked it into the book. But it was a nice example of a fleeting note that serves a quick, immediate purpose, and then maybe not. But I'm going to paste it into the back of the book as an example for future generations who find my copy.
Fleeting note, Easter egg, your signed copy. Yeah.
Yeah, I printed a bunch to give to you all, the beta readers and stuff. And inevitably, as it is with every book, I was like, I made there were 1 or 2 spelling errors, and I was like, that's fine. But then there was, I forget which one it was, and it was more grievous. So I had to go back. So I put a little note in. Yeah.
Nice.
I've only found 1 or 2 of those typos, though, so you did a pretty good job.
What you said?
I only found 1 or 2 of those typos so far. So
yeah, they'll pop up forever. I feel like.
I think. Another thing. I think everybody has the link to the Obsidian Vault, where this is a very long set of chat notes with a lot of good links and URLs in there. So I usually post that almost immediately as soon as Zoom gives me all of the different little files. So that'll go in immediately, and then probably it will take longer for the video to get processed now that I have these additional steps of going through the Vimeo AI and stuff. That may make it on today, might not make it till tomorrow morning.
Cool.
I wanted to ask, or go ahead, Chris. I think you were
Go
first.
ahead, Mohammed.
Yeah, it's a short question. So it's Bob, like, when writing the book, what part of it, like, you just wanted to kind of fucking stop and were like, oh my God, this section is like killing me, and you were like writing over and over and over, like the kind of slump part of writing the book where you were like, oh, this is not gonna be a book. Or was there any? Maybe there wasn't.
Well, I started the book years prior. And it was like, you may have heard me talk about this. I work on multiple things at the same time and then just kind of see which one takes off, you know? So there was definitely an early stage where I was like, what is this? Do we need this? Like, what's going on? And then the more, like, it took maybe 2 years or so of just being in conversation with people and being like, oh, okay, something like this could be really useful. I'm trying to think. I know there were moments in the book. I'm really trying to think. Well, a lot of it had to do with audience. I mean, Chris sort of hinted at that. Like, who am I speaking to? Is it beginners? Is it people more familiar? That came up in the beta read as well. And that, I remember that was really tricky. I'm trying to think. There were definitely sections where I just could not get them to come out right. Oh, there was one paragraph where I was like, F it. I put it in ChatGPT and I was like, you gotta fix this, you know? There's one paragraph. I know which paragraph it is, but no one knows what it is. I didn't keep that. I worked off of that. So it became my own, of course, but there was one, I just could not get the language right. And it was like weeks. It was stupid. It was like 2 sentences. And I'm like, I can't get it to say, like, what's the word I'm missing? You know, there's a word that's supposed to be here that's not landing or whatever.
So was that the paragraph that GPT was drunk or you? Given that Hemingway says, write drunk, edit sober.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to do it. I don't remember. I if I flip through the book, I would find it. But yeah, as with anything, you know, there are times when I throw things in ChatGPT just to shock my brain out of like a pattern and just be like, I don't expect it to be good. I don't expect it to be useful. I just expect it to offer something different. And then I could say, okay, maybe I can go in this, whatever. I've never actually found anything that I could use. But that said, yeah, I'm just trying. I want to give you like a real answer on that, Mohammed. You know, when you write like this bricolage, it's fun. I enjoy it. I really enjoy it, actually. But you do end up becoming a builder, and there is a lot of like organization because things you wrote, like I pulled from essays I wrote, I pulled from comments I put on Reddit. I am happy to do that. I advise people to do that. It's your work. Take it and turn it into something. But that process can be mind numbing after a while because you're just like, you put this paragraph in, you're like, why isn't it working? Why isn't it working? And it's not working because you didn't write it in the context of the paragraph before it. You wrote it 3 years ago. So I'm using different tone. My cadence is off. So you really have to become an editor. And Aaron's, to his credit, does mention this, that you largely become an editor. And I definitely agree with that when it comes
Although he and Scott, I think, suffer a little bit from I dumped out my box and rearranged the cards and then just inserted them in a particular order, kind of.
Which is interesting.
Which yours doesn't.
Aaron's talks about not doing that, which is interesting, and yet you get this feel. Scott's is an entirely, I mean, that's why I keep telling people this is marketing material. So it's like not, I don't even that's why I didn't even write a review of it. I had a review ready to go. I knew what that book was before it came out. I could have wrote that book I wrote part of that review before I read it because I knew what it was, you know. But you know, so the difference between maybe what I did and what Aaron's did. Again, I don't know Aaron's process, but I wrestled with that material so much. I mean, there were many months of 10-hour days just printing out chapters again and again and again and just ripping them up, you know, with ink. It was a heavy edit, this book. And that's the part that when I talk to people about writing, when I teach the course on writing, when I talk to people in places like this about writing, you know, I say, put your notes on the page, organize them. But there's a part of me that's like, when you get in it, it's a haul, you know. There is no trick at that point. You just have to have the grit to just go through that process. Anyone who's written a book knows. It's just, there is an aspect that is just, you got to muscle through it, mind muscle through it, you know. So yeah, to answer your question, a very long way, Mohammed. Yeah, there were a number of places where I struggled with that.
And then the cycle begins again, right? If you're going to write the next book, and then it's going to be struggle again, and then the suffering continues.
I started writing a book during this book. I was like, I need a break. So I started writing a different book, or just not writing a book. I started taking notes for something and organizing, outlining things a little bit. I love the process, but it is, I think there's a reason why writers don't live very long. I think
It's work. It's work.
It's work, and it's sitting.
Yes.
Yeah, a lot of sitting.
Yeah.
Hunched.
For everybody in this group except one, somebody was walking, right?
Oh yeah,
yeah. Okay, you're still now though, so, or are you still moving? Okay. Does anybody want to have the last word?
Still standing.
I believe Chris was going to say something before I interrupted him, but.
Oh, I wanted to, because it happened before Bob hopped on, but I'm curious if you specifically chose to write a book about indexing ideas and decided not to include an index at the back of the book.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. I thought about doing an index, and I thought, I don't have it in me. I think I just didn't have it in me. The internal references, I was like, people will get it. You know, I chose to make the table content very descriptive. I chose to structure the book in a way that would hopefully not require an index. But I will say, I get bummed when I don't see indexes in books, so I am at fault.
But this, of course, is an automatic 0 stars on Amazon, right?
Yeah. Well, someone gave me a 1 star because she said the book fell apart. Like you open it and it fell apart. And
When I see the Amazon reviews that says the delivery boy left it in the rain or whatever, it's like you're only giving this review to the author, really. It's on the author's page.
Right.
So at least do something about the book, you know, as in the cover's crap or the blurb on the back is crap or whatever. But please don't tell me about the delivery. What used to really get me was I was in a multinational company and we had a really big headquarters that everybody in the city knew where it was. And we roughly, in terms of those people using Amazon, it was about 40% Brits and 40% Yanks. And we were using both versions of Amazon. And yet only 50% of my orders would ever arrive. And it's literally the iconic building at the end of a road. And if you get down the end of that road, you can't go anywhere else. And Amazon delivery is useless.
Okay. And on that note, maybe we should say until next week. So, Bob, thank you so much for coming. Congratulations and have fun in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for having me. And yeah, I'll check out the videos, and if I have any comments or if you have any questions, questions, I really enjoy answering questions. They help me suss out my language for answers and future projects. So yeah, by all means, send them along. Happy to participate.
Cool. Well, thanks very much. Thanks everyone for coming. Sorry I was a bit late.
Thank you so much,
but,
Bob.
I guess I was surprised I only missed a couple of introductions, so I didn't get here as late as I thought maybe.
And next week, for those if you missed it, we're reading part 2, the second section, and we'll continue on from there.
So, unless we bog down, we're going to do this in 3 weeks of 2-hour sessions. So looking forward to it. Thanks a lot.
Take care, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Take care.